Thank you very much for joining us today for this special issue of Growing Up in Science. This is an event that will focus on the things that you wish you had known about doing a PhD, and we're aiming at people who are just started their PhD or who are considering a PhD. Besides Growing Up in Science, the organizer of this event is NYU's virtual research internship, which is being held for the first time in the Department of Psychology this year. And the goal of this internship is to offer insights on research and the application process for graduate school for traditionally underrepresented individuals. So a special welcome to the participants in that internship. We have an amazing panel here, which will be introduced by our moderator, Ali Cohen. So I will briefly introduce Ali. Ali received her bachelor's in neuroscience from Duke, PhD in neuroscience from Cornell. Then she began her postdoc at NYU, where she's working in the laboratory of Kate Hartley. Her research focuses on understanding neuro and cognitive mechanisms underlying how emotion and motivation influence learning and the formation of lasting memories across adolescence. Ali is also committed to making science accessible to the broader community. She collaborates with several organizations at NYU and beyond to lecture, provide mentorship, implement hands-on science activities, and contribute to scientifically informed policy efforts. Thank you very much for moderating today's event and organizing it. Ali, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Weiji, and thanks so much to all of the Growing Up in Science team for helping us to pull together this awesome event that we're really excited about. So with PhD applications and the start of a new academic year right around the corner, it seemed like the perfect time to talk about what some current graduate students wish they had known about doing a PhD. And we had so many fantastic questions. So thank you for the excellent suggestions for discussion. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get to every single one today, but we went through all of them and have compiled some major themes that we're going to touch upon that will hopefully address most of the questions. And Weiji will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A for further discussion. Just a quick little disclaimer before we get started. PhD students in general share lots of common experiences, but it's also important to recognize that each individual's journey is unique. So even within the same lab, two people can have vastly different experiences. So when listening to people's stories, try and gain a number of different perspectives in order for you to understand what PhD life might be like. Having said that, though, we have these really fantastic panelists that I'm honored to introduce so we can dive into the discussion. We have Johnny Coutinho, who completed his Bachelor of Science honors in Life Sciences at Queen's University, and then went on to the Queen's U Neuroscience Graduate Program at the Center for Neuroscience Studies, where he's entering the third year of his PhD. The center is multidisciplinary with students and faculty from a range of backgrounds, and prospective students typically match with a specific professor for acceptance. Johnny is passionate about community outreach and is also a member of the center's seminars organizing committee, including local Growing Up in Science seminars. Emily Diaz completed her undergraduate degree at Hofstra University, where she earned her Bachelor of Science in Biology with a concentration in molecular and cellular biology. After graduating, she worked briefly in biotechnology at Illumina. Emily is now at the University of California, San Diego, about to start her fourth year of the Biomedical Sciences program, where she rotated through 3 labs before finding her current thesis lab. Newly minted Dr. Julie Lee moved from Canada to the UK to pursue her graduate degree in psychology at the University of Bristol. Her first year was spent as a double major or joint honors in psychology and philosophy. Julie then went on to a PhD in neuroscience with a year of rotations at University College London. Including rotation, she spent 5 years in her PhD and actually just defended a few weeks ago. So congratulations, Dr. Lee. Yes, much applause deserved. Our final panelist is Melanie Silverman, who completed her bachelor's degree in neuroscience at Barnard College. She then worked as a research coordinator for 2 years in labs at Weill Cornell Medicine, which is where I met her. And she's exploring the development of self-regulation in clinical and typically developing populations. Afterwards, she enrolled in Fordham University's clinical psychology program, which uses a match system. And Melanie is currently starting the 4th year in her program. So the first topic that we're going to address, and we're just going to dive right into it, is choosing and applying to PhD programs. And so since I started with you for the intro, Johnny, let's go ahead and start with you here. So how did you prepare for applying to PhD programs?
I think part of it kind of came in undergrad when I sort of realized I wanted to do research. I was interested in trying it out. So in 4th year, I did an undergrad thesis project, which turned out to be the lab that I continued to do grad school in. At the same time, I also got a different lab job at that time, and it was just trying things out was what ended up making the decision easier for me.
Awesome. And how about you, Emily? You did a brief stint in biotech. What made you decide to go on to do a PhD?
Yeah, so I did a bunch of research experiences and summer programs throughout my undergraduate career. So I realized I really wanted to go into research. Since I lived in San Diego, kind of the heart and home of biotech in California, it's a pretty big industry here. I thought it would be good to get some experience kind of dipping a toe into the other side of things. Thankfully, I figured out I really like research and not so much biotech, but I thought it was a good experience to get, and it made me sort of re-up my desire to get a PhD.
So when you made that decision, how did you go about starting to decide sort of what area you wanted to do research in, and what criteria did you use to apply?
Right. The first thing I did was make an enormous spreadsheet of all the different schools that I thought would be interesting to apply to, what different programs within the schools. And what made a big difference to me was actually looking at individual faculty research profiles. Because I thought if I'm going to be at a school, I want to make sure that there's a great number of research members that I could see myself working with. So I went through, listed some potential labs I wanted to join, and kind of gated the programs I wanted to do based on that.
Did you find, Julie, that your experience was similar? It seems like you and Emily are both the two that are in rotating programs. So was choosing or finding a school with particular mentors you were interested in particularly important to you, your process as well?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, for me, I thought I was going to stay in the UK for my PhD, and the combination of universities that were good for neuroscience and universities that had full funding for international students and had research I was interested in, I think just kind of narrowed it down to really just 3 places. So those were the 3 I applied to. So applying to the specific institutions I did was kind of, I guess, not a difficult choice, just kind of more about circumstance. But I guess I chose to do a PhD, just kind of just knew, I figured out in late high school what an academic, or I thought I figured out what an academic did. So that kind of from then I was interested in pursuing that as a career. So I guess as Emily said, I was interested in doing a lot of research as an undergrad. So then it kind of just one thing led to another.
Great. And Melanie, I know as a clinical psychology PhD student, you applied to specific mentors. So how was your experience similar or different? And what advice would you have for people to try and stand out from a large pool of applicants?
Yeah, my experience sounds somewhat similar to others in that I started research in undergrad and found that I really liked it. And then my 2-year research assistantship, as Ali knows, was really helpful in sort of narrowing my research interests and figuring out what path I wanted to go down. And I think having that time to narrow my interests a bit helped me identify professors at different universities who I might be interested in working with and whose research interests aligned with mine. So that time was really helpful. It also gave me an opportunity to meet other professors in the field and to get to know people who knew potential mentors, because matching to me made me a bit nervous. It's like you meet someone pretty briefly and then you are committing to a pretty long-term relationship with them. So it was nice to have made some connections and have people who knew the professors that I was applying to in some places. So yeah, I would say that taking the time to work in the field for a few years before applying to grad school was helpful for me.
And Johnny, do you have anything to add on that front in terms of matching and finding your best fit advisor?
I agree with what Melanie said, that it's really hard to get a full impression from a really short time that you might have an interview for a match. So if you do have any opportunities to extend that, like to visit the lab more, shadow, talk to students from that lab, things like that, to gather more data, get a better impression of it, I think that's helpful. Other than that, I definitely agree with the challenges.
Great. And another question that came up a lot was preparing for interviews and what are faculty looking for during interviews? So I just want to get thoughts from each of you on that. Let's start with Julie. Any tips for preparing for interviews or what you felt like faculty or other people you were talking to were looking for in interviews?
Yeah, I think in the UK, at least from my experience, it seems pretty personalized. So every program is very different, and out of I think I had 3 interviews, they're all very different, and the way they approach the interview questions was very different. And my program was very unusual in being kind of trying to grill you and ask you questions that you wouldn't expect, whereas other programs I interviewed for were kind of asking the more rote questions, like asking you to explain research that you've done already. So that was a recurring theme, to ask you to explain research you've done in the past. And then some of them, but not all of them, asked the generic questions like, why do you want to do a PhD? And why do you want to apply to this university specifically? Yeah.
What about your experience, Melanie? Was it similar? Do you have any other tips to add?
Yeah, I think the types of questions I had were similar as I recall it. I think, I don't know, in my experience, and now having been on the other side of it and interviewed potential lab mates, I think I think if you've gotten to the interview stage on paper, you have so much of what they're looking for. And so they really just want to get to know you as a person and see if there's someone who they would like to spend time with and work with for many years. So I know it's hard, what does it mean? But just trying to be yourself and be as comfortable as you can, even though it's an incredibly nervous making situation. I think know that if you're in the interview, you're doing great. So just try and be yourself.
Maybe this is a good moment to have a quick look at the Q&A. Ali, do you want to do that now? So,
sure.
Or would it break your flow?
No, that's fine. I just can't see it. So okay, if you want to bring it up.
While you do that, can I just say a quick caveat, which is that in the UK, it's actually not the case that the interview is kind of already the stage in which they kind of know they want you. In the UK, it's much more early in the process that you get, at least mentally in the process that you get interviewed. So it's still very much an assessment. And from experience talking to friends who interviewed in both countries, I guess the UK system can seem more hostile for the interview process, because they are really trying to assess you, and they felt a lot more welcomed when they interviewed for US programs. But yeah, it just kind of depends on the country's specific requirements.
Okay, so in the Q&A, the top voted question is, are PhDs reciprocal across countries? And the answer is clearly yes. So whenever you have a PhD from one country, it also counts in other countries. Then the next is, would you recommend concentrating on a single research project during undergrad or multiple projects within a lab? Is it better to specialize in a tiny area or to have diverse research experiences? And then related to that, I'll just loop it in. How many labs, projects, internships should you have under your belt before applying?
Right, so it seems like Emily and Johnny, you're the lucky two who get to field those questions. So Emily, do you want to go ahead and start?
Sure. So in my undergrad, I had one lab that I worked in at my like home institute, in addition to like 1 or 2 summer programs. And I thought that was a pretty good balance. So I worked in my home institute lab for 2.5 years. And that allowed me to like really focus on building a project underneath myself, and one that I felt very sort of independent in, and I felt like I really owned that project. So I think that gave me a lot of confidence. But dipping out into like little summer programs or maybe some different labs briefly was really beneficial to me. I think there's also, in line with that, there's no one set number that's going to be the best number for you. I think doing what feels comfortable and what makes you feel like very strong in your skills, it's what's going to benefit you the most, which is kind of a cop-out answer. But I think really focusing and building sort of good baseline skills, especially I'm speaking from a wet lab sort of perspective, where you master some of the most common techniques like Western blots, qPCR. These are skills that you're going to need for your PhD program. And the sooner you can build those and the stronger you feel in them is going to be the best bet.
Definitely not a cop-out answer. That was a great answer. How about you, Johnny? What was your research experience prior to PhD?
I didn't have any publications, but I had some research experiences, mostly volunteering in different labs. I thought that was helpful to give me perspective in terms of making decisions in my life. But I actually recently had this conversation with my PI, and I'd like to remind that a PhD program, like, you're a student in this, so you shouldn't expect like, how could I already have all the skills needed to do a PhD when you're applying? The whole point of going through this process is learning some of those skills. So, I mean, the more experience you can have beforehand, great, but don't feel like you need to already be done a PhD in order to apply to one.
Yeah, and maybe I can just add the faculty's perspective here. So I completely agree with what Emily and Johnny just said. So I think that typically successful applicants at a place like NYU, they have 2 research experiences under their belts. One of them, it tends to be much bigger, like what Emily was describing, where you've really dug deep and maybe even had a poster or maybe even a paper, but that's absolutely not a requirement out of your research. And the other one might be a shorter one. To address one of the questions that came up in the Q&A, it's okay if those are in diverse areas of psychology, because like Johnny is saying, you're not expected to have things figured out, right? So it's completely normal that as an undergraduate, you're still sort of trying different lines of research to see what suits you best, or maybe you're just limited in terms of the labs that are available at your institution, right? So I think we look at this not as with an eye on like, oh, is this exactly what you want to do here, but have you taken something away from it? So one of my favorite ways in which a research statement is written is, oh, I tried A and B. They were very different from each other. A is something that I was very interested in, but after I tried it, I realized that this was not my thing because of blah, blah, blah. And eventually I decided that I want to continue in B, and that's why I'm applying in a program that focuses on B, right? So take your research experiences, describe them in a meaningful way, and also describe the personal growth that you have achieved as a result.
Thanks, Wei-Ji. I think actually Johnny's response about learning during the PhD brings us perfectly into our next topic of conversation, which is a day in the life of a PhD student. And I know there's no 2 days that are exactly the same in PhD land, but if you could each go through, and let's start with Melanie, and let us know what a day in your life as a clinical psychology PhD student looks like.
Yeah. Can I take a twist, but I'll keep it brief? I think in clinical programs, just given the research and clinical components, I think a week might be more helpful. So it's basically 2 days a week I'm typically doing clinical work in a hospital setting or in a community clinic. And then 2 days a week I'm doing research. And then after your first year, 1 day a week, I'm teaching and or taking classes is roughly how it works out in my program, but I'm sure it varies, but that's sort of the general sense.
And Emily, what does a day or a week in your life look like as a biomedical sciences PhD student?
So a lot of reading, lots and lots of reading of different articles, trying to figure out what's a good direction to go. I would do a lot of mouse work in my lab. So again, kind of a week is I'd normally dedicate 1 or 2 days to just mouse colony maintenance and making sure everybody looks good and healthy. I do a lot of cell biology work, so setting up experiments in vitro, setting up experiments in vivo in the mice. Pretty wide range of experiments to set up, and then usually 1 or 2 days, even a month, are like big takedown days and big analysis days. So that's kind of vague, but honestly, it's a lot of reading and a lot of planning and preparing for experiments, not so much the glamorous experiment days.
And did that reading, sort of another question that came up a lot was how everyone comes up with their thesis project. So would you say that that was instrumental in coming up with your thesis project?
Oh, absolutely. Because you have to not only evaluate where the field that you're in is at and try to find a good direction that you can take your thesis project that's going to contribute to the wider understanding of your field, but you also want to read for techniques. Like if you want to do a new assay, you have to figure out how to do it, where to get reagents and things like that. So it's definitely instrumental to planning your thesis project. And if you read something that's maybe a little too close to comfort to your thesis project, what directions do you want to go in response to that?
And Johnny, another question that came up a lot was sort of how undergrad and grad experiences differed. And I feel like you're the perfect case control study since you have been at Queen's the whole time. So could you speak to that a little bit and the skills you've been gaining to complete your PhD?
So just to understand the question clearly, it's how does research as an undergrad versus a grad student differ?
I think people mostly just wanted to know, how does your daily life differ?
Like things are a lot more, I guess, organized and structured and scheduled in undergrad. Like you're kind of doing things that are prescribed in a certain way, and especially like the goals at the end, you kind of know what they are in advance. Like, you know, like I have these exams, I have these assignments, these are my learning goals, this is what I need to do to succeed. And in grad school, it's a lot more, you're figuring that out as you go, often in hindsight. It's like, that didn't work, that did work. Like, this is the kinds of experiments I'm going to keep doing. These are the kinds of models I'm going to develop, or these are the questions I'm going to ask. Like, you're constantly even refining how you think of the question you're asking. And so that was like, that's a huge change from the undergrad experience, I think. Just taking more independence about your project, even like thinking about like your thesis is sort of something that you don't necessarily decide at a point in time, but something that develops over the whole process. So there's a lot more uncertainty, a lot more chaos, but also a lot more like responsibility. Like you're on top of things as opposed to like you're going through things.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a nice in-depth answer. Julie, I wanted to sort of ask you to maybe focus a little bit on the latter end of your PhD, since you're our most recent graduate. And, you know, in addition to all the topics that everyone else has talked about, thinking about how you sort of built your support system to get you through PhD.
Yeah, I guess the most relevant answer is that luckily, you know, because I was in a rotation-based program, I was able to choose my lab after some familiarity, I guess, with the institution, although I technically didn't rotate in that lab. And so I chose the lab because I realized I got along very well with the people there, both on a personal level and like scientifically. So, you know, on a normal day when we're not working from home, like we're quite social, and that is quite important for, like, you know, if I get annoyed, I'll just go into the coffee room and usually find someone there to like talk to, you know, have lunch together, and sometimes we'll have like coffee in the afternoons. Other than that, yeah, having just, I guess, meeting people from other social circles. Like, I think having rotations also helps. I don't think people really talk about this, but like it helps also gain your network, because you basically gain like friends or, you know, network connections from 3 different labs along the way, or however many rotations you have. So that also helps. I had a lot of connection with people that I had met through those different rotations as well. And people I met from hobbies.
And Melanie, could you speak to this from the matching perspective a little bit more about how you sort of built your support system and made connections when you just went straight into your thesis lab?
Yeah, I think I kind of started by just getting to know my lab mates, and then from there I was able to like meet other people through classes primarily, and being taught by other professors in the department allowed me to establish a relationship with other faculty. I'm trying to think. I think it to some degree also depends on cohort size. Like, I happen to have a very close cohort, and it may be large depending on your perspective, but it's a cohort of 10. So that group is incredibly supportive, and I don't know where I would be without them, to be honest. So just sort of developing relationships with them through our shared grad school experiences has been really helpful.
Ali, is this a good time to go to some questions? Okay, so one question that arose to the top is, what does reaching out to a professor in advance look like? So we've all heard that it's a good idea to already make a connection and see if somebody has space in their lab. But what do you actually do? So every professor gets a lot of emails of this type, so it really pays off to write a personalized, targeted email. And Kate Nussenbaum just posted a resource that PhD students at NYU have put together about how to reach out with examples from emails. So you should be able to see that in the Q&A under answered questions. So there's a link there. We will also post it on Growing Up in Science website, but it has examples. The most important thing is a very commonsensical thing, which is you want to do some homework. So you want to try to formulate how the professor's research speaks to you, how it's related to your interest and to your background, and maybe even talk about some ideas that you have in this area. It doesn't have to be too specific, but it has to be enough that the professor sees that you've thought about it and that you're not writing the same email to 100 different labs. Then,
can I also comment?
Yes.
So I just want to say, like, also, most importantly, don't give up. I think a lot of undergraduates, including me, will send an email, not get a response, and think, oh, he must hate me, or like, I'm not going to try to email him again. But usually they're just busy, so just keep trying. I mean, give it a few more emails and then give up, maybe. But
yes,
yeah,
yes.
Don't give up.
Thank you, Julie. So I have been on that side. So I often have this bad habit of letting the most thoughtful emails sit for the longest, because I actually want to write a thoughtful reply, and that sometimes means that it just drops out of the front page of my inbox. So definitely follow up. 1 week, 2 weeks is enough. If you don't get a reply after 2 reminders, then that might mean that there's just no hope with that lab. But definitely don't stick to 1 email. Then another question is, do most students go straight into PhD after undergrad, or is it recommended to take a gap year? And related to that, is it suggested to do an MA or MS program, a master's program, before going to PhD? Emily.
So this past year, I actually worked on so at UCSD, admissions is comprised of both students and faculty members. So it's on our admissions board. And it seems like it fluctuates year by year, but a lot of students there's a pretty even split between, like, some people did masters, some people came straight from undergrad, and some people worked either in industry. But what's great is that everybody's held to sort of similar standards. So you take into account the time that was spent externally. So if it's a master's program and they've got like 2 or 3 publications, that applicant is weighed equally as somebody coming straight out of undergrad that maybe doesn't have any publications. So the time out of undergrad is taken into account, at least in my program. So I think that people are weighed at their point in their career. And I think that was really reassuring to see, because I came basically straight out of undergrad. I didn't have any publications. I had like 1 poster. And I was really worried, like, oh, am I going to be able to make it in a program at all? And it was reassuring to know that, no, where you are in your career is taken into account, and sort of what guidelines are there is present.
Yeah, and just to add to that, it surprises me that still many undergraduates think that you must have a master's in order to go for a PhD program. So that might be true in some countries. Maybe that's the case in the UK, but it is not the case it's also not true in the UK, I see Julie say, but it's definitely not the case in the US and Canada. And very often, if you have a choice between doing a master's program and being a research assistant in a lab, I would recommend the latter. And there are several reasons for that. So first of all, a master's is expensive, whereas as a research assistant, you get paid. That makes a difference. Second, as a master's student, you often have to spend a lot of time taking courses rather than focusing on research. And also, if you are a research assistant in a lab and you're actually substantially involved in the research, that will give you a strong recommendation letter, which is often harder to get as a master's student. So I would say that there are certain cases where a master's is recommended. For example, you're trying to apply to a US university for PhD, but you have an undergraduate degree from a lesser known foreign university. In that case, it might be recommended to do a master's in the US before you get to a PhD. Even so, you could still try research assistantships as well. But like in all other cases, I would probably think twice.
Thanks, Weiji. And now Emily's talked a little bit about sort of the transition, and Melanie talked about how working as a research assistant for a couple of years was really helpful for her. Is it right, Johnny and Julie, that you guys went straight through, or did either of you take detours? Okay, so let's just get brief perspective from each of you. Let's start with Julie about sort of going straight through and how that transition was.
Yeah, I guess I was kind of prepared for what it would be like in some sense, because I was just like, I like Googling things and reading up about it, and so I was prepared for the life of a PhD student. But one thing that was different was that up to that point, I had never completed a research project. Like I'd done a lot of like little things as undergrad, but like none of them really panned out as they tend to do. So I guess one new thing was kind of being prepared for being in the long haul, especially with the whole like the 5-year or whatever plus year PhD. I think like sticking to a project and like maintaining motivation was yeah, an important like transition and development.
What about you, Johnny? What were your thoughts?
Well, I had a bit of experience doing an undergrad research project in the lab that I continued in grad school in. And so I think for me, that experience was crucial in me deciding this was right, in particular this lab, this environment. And there were a lot of things other than the research that really like made my decision, just like the place that I live, the work environment, the people around me, things like that were also contributing factors to that decision.
Great, Johnny, you just keep providing these great segues to the next topic of conversation. So the people around us, all the other things in our life that sort of make up our lives outside the PhD is the next topic that lots of people had questions about. So let's go ahead and start with you, Melanie. How do you make PhD life work within your life?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an ongoing balancing act, to be honest. I do think I've just tried to really make it a priority to maintain relationships with people and stay engaged in things outside of my like academic life. in part because I worked a lot as a research assistant and didn't do that so well. So I think that was in part a learning experience. I think it's hard. I would say there is an element though to which like having expectations from people outside of academia is helpful. Like if I have committed to having dinner with a friend at 7, then I like need to be focused during the day and like get whatever I need to get done because I know I need to leave lab at 6. So in that way, like committing yourself to other things can make you more productive. And so I try and strike that balance is the most concrete thing I think I can say here. But yeah, it's a tough part of being a PhD student for sure.
And Emily, how do you balance work and life and your academic pursuits and your other interests?
So I'm doing recently, well, before the pandemic completely scrambled everything, I tried my best to leave lab at lab. So if I plan to do readings, I do it at lab. If I do experiments, I do it at lab. If I'm doing data analysis, I do it at lab. So then that really creates a kind of delineates a line between home life and work life, where I try my best to not let them bleed over, because I was reading like all hours of the night or like doing data analysis at home. And I realized that created kind of a murkiness between actually relaxing and feeling the pressure to do everything lab all the time.
Yeah, definitely. I think we all feel that pressure in PhD. Johnny, could you speak a little bit more to sort of broader impacts? So you mentioned that outreach is something you're really passionate about. How do you balance engaging in these activities with your PhD commitments?
I gotta admit, I'm pretty lucky in that my PI is also a huge advocate for healthy work-life balance and is always encouraging us to have, outside interests, to take time for personal hobbies, for advocacy goals, any kind of interest that we have. And to echo what Melanie said, I think having other things or like having commitments and plans sometimes can help motivate you to use the time you do have more efficiently. And so to me, that's kind of a big one. I know that like when I have a lot of time, I can let the task expand into the time duration that I have rather than just taking the time I need to do something. And so trying to plan a lot. I mean, another part of it is also realizing you're human and sometimes you don't make all your commitments. Sometimes things fall a little bit short of your expectations, and these are learning opportunities for you to do better next time. But when you're trying to do a lot of things at the same time, not everything's gonna go perfectly too. So being like gentle with yourself and being nice to the people around you that also are supporting you and helping everything work out together. I think that's just a really important way to keep your sanity as you go through any process.
I love that piece of advice. Julie, in terms of, you made the transition from Canada to the UK for your higher level education. So how have you sort of balanced work and life, particularly in that big transition that you made?
I'm not really sure I understand the question. Can you say that again?
So have you had, given, I'm assuming that your family and other loved ones are still in Canada, right? So I guess my question is, how do you sort of balance moving to a new country and sort of having all these new experiences that come with just moving and moving your life and starting a whole new chapter, or in this case, 2 new chapters, your undergrad and your PhD in a new location?
Yeah, I mean, I guess this answer is not going to be very helpful because I moved specifically to like start a new like community, I guess, not because I hated the people where I was from, but like I just wanted to kind of shed the person I'd become before and just kind of be a new person in a new place. I guess I like novelty and meeting new people. So I guess that transition was kind of part of the bonus for me, was like the opportunity to explore a new place and meet new people and engage in new hobbies and stuff like that.
Awesome. And then another question that came up a lot, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot for this, so I'm going to ask you to volunteer yourself to talk about it, is the financial aspects of a PhD. So a lot of people were concerned about whether you would make enough money to get by, if you could work another job or part-time job. So I'm just going to ask one of you to raise your hands or jump in for whoever would be willing to speak to that.
I guess I'll just say, oh, sorry, Melanie. I just want to say quickly, like, just technical point is that on a UK visa, you're not allowed to work more than 20 hours a week part-time. So you really can't like have any side hustles or anything like that. So it really depends on just your salary and stipends.
Thanks. Melanie, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can add a few things from my experience. I guess I try and budget carefully. I am not affiliated with YNAB, You Need a Budget, but it's a really helpful app that helps with budgeting, which I have just found necessary given what our stipends look like. In my program, I mean, granted, I can work in the US, but I have been able to do, it kind of fluctuates, but I have been able to at times get in some part-time work, primarily tutoring. I've also done some babysitting. So things like that that sort of have a flexible schedule and you can book when it works for you. I have been able to work in some of that if I am feeling like I have the time. Yeah.
Do you feel like, especially, sorry, I'm going to pick on you because you're in New York City, which is quite expensive. Do you feel like you need to do those things to get by, or is it more of an additional component?
It's dependent on the year. So my program is funded for the academic year and not funded for the summer. I've been lucky enough for the most part to get like summer research fellowships over the summer. But my first year, I hadn't quite figured out the system well enough. And so I knew that I wasn't going to be fully funded over the summer. So intentionally the year prior, like that spring, I did a lot of tutoring to make up for what I was going to be missing over the summer, which would have been challenging financially. But typically with my funding package and typically being able to get summer research funding, it's not necessary.
And Johnny, I'll go to you to either answer this question, or if you want to move on, we can talk a little bit more about planning for the future. So career routes, exploring different career paths, up to you.
I'll add to the finance point, just because it's really similar to what Melanie said about costs of living depending on where you are. So it's like weird advice because I don't know how much control like a student could have over this, but when you're looking at like finances, it's not just your stipend and tuition to think of it, but the regional costs of living. And maybe this is a great plug for like universities in smaller towns where things are cheaper. That can go a long way, even if like nominally you're making less or whatever it is, that could actually like be a really big difference to your take home.
Yeah, I just want to echo that. I think there are advantages to being in places with a lower cost of living as a grad student. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. And Emily, I'll turn to you to close out if you wanted to add anything to the financial aspects, but also if you could address sort of planning for career development options, planning for the future.
Sure. So I'm pretty fortunate. My program is fully funded and we're guaranteed funding for 5 years. And then any external fellowship funding is up to you to apply and receive. San Diego also has a pretty high cost of living. You have to balance like cheaper rent by living farther away, and but it's pretty, our stipend's pretty stable here at least, so I feel pretty fortunate. We do have rules about part-time work, like we're not allowed to work X amount more, given that they want the majority of your focus to be on the program. So I haven't had really the opportunity to pursue any kind of side hustles on the way here. But no, the program that I'm in is pretty generous. As far as planning for the future goes, this is something that I'm actively thinking about as a third going on fourth year, is getting experiences and networking. What's great is a lot of schools, a lot of programs will have sort of career development outreach things. So there's a panel series, seminar series going on at my program where each week it's a different panel of people from different career paths. So there's been things like like medical liaisons, biotech people, scientific writers. So each week there's 3 or 4 people, they give a presentation, you get their LinkedIn information, and little things like that make a world of difference. So most programs have sort of these career development programs, and I find them tremendously helpful.
Does anyone have anything else to add in terms of planning for the future, career routes?
I do think there's one thing to mention just about clinical programs for anybody that's considering them, is that in the last year of the program, you do what's called an internship. And there's a match system, and you essentially match at a hospital or clinic anywhere in the US, assuming that you're in a program in the US. And so that can be one move, and then people sometimes will stay there for postdoc, but also frequently move again for postdoc, and then perhaps move again for a faculty position. So just keeping in mind that those moves are potential aspects of the program to keep in mind.
On the topic of internships, so very often programs also offer PhD students an opportunity to do an internship in industry. So for example, many neuroscience and psychology PhD students end up doing summer internships in data science, right? And the idea is then that you just, again, to get a taste of what that work is like before you can have to make a decision about which route to pursue.
All right. Weiji, are there any questions that we should address in the chat before moving on?
There are many, and I think we are actually going to be busy for the rest of the time just answering the 62 open questions. Thanks everybody so much for contributing these questions. I first have to correct something I said earlier. So I understand now that PhD programs in Canada do typically require a master's. So that's actually a difference between the US and Canada. I was giving wrong information before. Now, many of the top questions have to do with judging whether you are a competitive applicant for a PhD program. And that comes in different forms. So one person has worked in 2 labs as a research assistant in undergrad, but did some unrelated research afterwards. One person is now going into their 3rd year as a research assistant and is wondering if they should apply. So I would say a couple of things to that. So admissions committees that I'm familiar with, they typically look for 2 research experiences. Typically those are in different labs. And you would need to have 2 strong letters from those PIs. If you have that, and your GPA is pretty good, then you should just give it a try. I wouldn't start worrying too much about how competitive you are, because you're not going to know that in advance, but you're definitely going to be good enough to be considered. Yeah, of course, it costs money to apply in most places. So there is some cost. I'm not going to deny that, but don't select yourself out. Don't say, okay, I'm not good enough now, let me wait another year. You should just try, and if it doesn't work, you have some experience and you try again next year. Then publications are definitely an advantage, but they're not necessary. Many PhD admits don't have any publications. If you are not sure and you want to talk with somebody about whether you're competitive, then your research advisors should be the first people to give you that advice. So if you can, please do have that conversation with them, because they know your situation best. Does any of the panelists want to add anything on this?
So I'll point out some schools, like at least Queen's Neuro, selection is more between like a student and a prof as opposed to like the department. And so I think that's a really good opportunity where you can like email professors and get a chance to like start a conversation without, the application fees to a university, and you can try to figure out compatibility and fit in that kind of a way, and it's a little more personalized. So in my experience applying to places, it was mostly things like that, where I would be like interested in specific labs and just make conversations or start emails with professors, and hopefully if we could do one in person, that would be like a nice next step. And so I think thinking about that could also be helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Johnny. Yeah, so that's actually a difference between most psychology programs and most neuroscience programs. Most psychology programs still have a system where the PI whose lab you're going to join has like a very, very big say in whether you get admitted to the program, whereas neuroscience programs often have a rotation system where you don't get admitted to one particular lab in the beginning. And then a related question that got a lot of votes is there a recommendation for the number of programs you apply to? So that's very, very hard to say. And I think it depends on how, of course, the specific merits of your application and also your how highly you aim, right? So if you only applying to top schools, of course, your chances are lower than if you have more of a mixed set. Typically, a recommendation is to apply to some top schools and then maybe some slightly lower ranked schools. But yeah, what Johnny is saying is also very important, that if an advisor admits you, then actually the number of applications or the number of programs is not even that important. It's more whether you have a good match and you have maybe already a prior rapport with the PI.
Anybody else want to weigh in on those topics before we move on to the next one?
I guess I just want to say another like clarification about the UK. I don't think, well, it was different, I guess, maybe different 5 years ago, but there weren't application fees except for Oxford, Cambridge, and UCL, and some UCL programs kind of like diverted the main system and you didn't have to pay an application fee. And the ones that you do have to pay are £50 per application, I think, although they might have changed that since, so you should look into it.
Thanks, helpful tip. All right, our next topic that got a lot of questions was about the biggest challenges in being a PhD student. So I was actually going to start with you, Julie, back to you, given that you've now completed the PhD. What would you say were some of, or the biggest challenge that you've encountered?
Yeah, I guess it's something I alluded to earlier, which is just kind of maintaining the motivation and, you know, because as I said, I hadn't completed like a project before undergrad. I did complete a project in my rotation, but that was like a 3-month project. So like sticking it out for 5 years, and inevitably, I'm pretty sure like 99% of PhD students reach a point where they like hate their project and really like, you know, want to not do it anymore. So I think like pushing through that kind of struggle, I think, is one of the biggest challenges as a PhD student. And obviously your support network is crucial to that journey, for them to tell you like, you know, no, you're okay, like just, you know, keep at it and you'll see the other side. Other than that, yeah, I guess the work-life balance and, you know, keeping things around you to maintain, I guess related to that, like maintain your sanity and yeah, so that you're motivated by things other than just your work.
Can you say a little more about what that support network looks like for you? So like who's in that support network?
Yeah, I guess it's varied over the years, but typically like people from my university, either fellow PhD students or postdocs, including in my lab and also outside my lab from like rotations that I've been in. People online, I guess, like Twitter, and also just friends I made from my other hobbies. So I play ice hockey and I learned cello for a year. So people I've met from that also, yeah, help with just kind of also giving a different perspective and, you know, realizing that, you know, you may, like there's kind of some extent, like some of the struggles that you're facing are general like to the human condition. So it's not just like you, something like feeling of loneliness can be another challenge in your PhD.
Thanks. Emily, what are some of the biggest challenges that you've faced so far in your PhD and how did you overcome them?
Definitely getting used to failure was a big one, because science is about 90% failure And that shouldn't scare you away, because the experiments you're doing should be something that nobody's ever done before. So you have to figure out what's new and what's novel. And sometimes they just don't work. So that's a big thing. What's also a big thing is repetition, is getting not so bogged down and doing similar experiments with like the slightest tweak to get new results and to further narrow in on what's interesting. There are some experiments that I feel like I've done a million times at this point, but each time is important. So making sure that you continually remember that this is important work that you're doing, that you're hopefully discovering something new and novel, goes a long way into making sure that you don't want to like throw your pipette out the window.
Speaking of throwing pipettes out the window, another question was, how do you stay motivated and keep yourself motivated given all the different things that are happening within a PhD? So Melanie, do you want to speak a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely something that I've struggled with, just between clinical work, like seeing patients, trying to continue to make progress on research projects, teaching undergrads and balancing that, and also taking my own classes. It's definitely like a lot to have on your plate, and it can feel like nothing is moving forward as quickly as you might want it to, which is incredibly frustrating. And I think kind of comes back to something that Johnny said before, of just trying to be kind to yourself. And if you are putting in your best effort each day and you make a few steps forward and a couple different things, like you've made some progress, and appreciate yourself for having done that. And then also just social support. I think having strong friends within your program, and then also like people outside of academia who like don't know what a comps exam is and like are just completely in another world, is really helpful to stay grounded and not become so like myopic in your view.
Definitely all important factors. And I know, Johnny, you've brought up a bunch of them already, but I'll just ask you to expand a little bit about maybe how you've combated any feelings of burnout or just continued to stay motivated.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to realize that burnout is going to happen in some way or another, in like some varying magnitude along this journey. And so having strategies to deal with it when it does. People mentioned support networks. I think that's so important. Also, like for me, I find like teaching and advocacy is one of the most rewarding parts of what I do. And for whatever it is for you, finding out like what is rewarding for you is really important. For me, when I'm teaching, I think it puts a lot of things in perspective. For example, like my learning accomplishments personally, you can see it when you're talking to another person, when you're doing it. Like sometimes it's hard to evaluate your own progress in this journey because you're always looking ahead. You're always looking like, what can I improve on next? What do I have to do now? And it's sometimes you don't get those moments to just pause and be like, wow, I actually accomplished a lot, even if this wasn't how I wrote it on the priority list, or this didn't reflect my daily to-dos. Like we've made a journey, we've come so far in a year. And by like teaching, trying to like explicitly give that back to other people, I think it's a really great way to realize it for myself at least. And I like the human aspect, the social networking aspect to it, and knowing that you're kind of not alone in this. You know, you try to be supportive for students and students are supportive for you. Sometimes you're in different roles, whether you're the student or the mentor. And so just trying to connect with people, like be kind to yourself, be kind to the people around you, and it kind of pays it forward and comes back around.
On the flip side, oh, go ahead. Let's go with Julie first.
Yes.
I just want to say, like, my strategy that I just remembered was also going to a lot of conferences and summer schools and workshops, I guess, as well. This is like very much like depends on how much financial resources you have from your lab and your program and everything. So I recognize not everyone can do that, but I went to like way too many summer schools, I think, for anyone one PhD student should go to. But every time I find it like really motivating because there's a bunch of people that are very excited about, you know, just learning, and you're just constantly having conversations and learning things, new things. So I think, yeah, getting into a space where you can talk to a bunch of people who are all interested and learn about new things other than just your PhD research project, I think can motivate you to kind of care about science broadly. And nowadays, like I think virtual conferences kind of add a lot of accessibility to that.
Awesome. I just want to highlight one other question that I'm going to open to the floor because it's another hot button topic, but a bunch of people brought it up. If any of you would feel comfortable talking about overcoming interpersonal issues or tensions and biases, so sort of on the flip side of this strong social network, where did you go for help in sort of loose terms, if any of you feel comfortable addressing that?
I could go, even though if no one else wants to. I guess, like, not necessarily talking about a specific event, but like I think anytime I did have frustrations, I definitely talked to the postdocs that I met in my rotations year, because I think having someone like one stage above you is really helpful, because, you know, they've kind of like seen it, you know, they've been through the trenches and they kind of, you know, have seen it and also gotten that on the other side. So they kind of have that perspective and can tell you, like, you know, either like agree with you that your situation is crazy, or like, you know, point, like kind of shape you in the right way. I don't know.
All right, Wei Ji, do you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something about failure and imposter syndrome. So as many of the people in attendance probably know, growing up in science was actually started in a way to make themes such as failure and imposter syndromes easier to talk about in the academic community. So a typical growing up in science event would involve a single professor talking about their life story with an emphasis on failures, detours, struggles, self-doubt. And over the 6 years that I have run this series, I have heard so many professors, including very experienced professors, talk about their current imposter syndrome, that they still suffer from imposter syndrome, that they still find it difficult to deal with failure. And we can talk at length about the causes of that, but you're definitely not alone if you feel that you're not good enough or you don't belong. You are good enough and you do belong, and very often failure is because we're just in a very difficult business. We are in a line of work where you're answering hard questions using imperfect methods and doing that with limited time and other resources. So I think that you have to be clear-minded about attribution of failure, and it's very rarely about yourself, provided of course that you put in the time and effort. Also, something that you have to sometimes wonder about is what your advisor's role in this is, because we've talked also about a lot about mentorship in other growing up in science events, and I think we're going to have more on that in a bit, but mentors are super important in giving you that self-confidence, also teaching you how to properly do that attribution of failure. And on the flip side, the worst mentors, they can actually make you feel like crap and unworthy, even though you are worthy and you are a good scientist.
Wei Ji, could you say something about where to go for help if students are experiencing issues interpersonally with their mentors or with others, or biases, etc.?
Yeah, that's a long conversation, and unfortunately many departments have inadequate procedures for reporting grievances and toxic environments and abuse and aggressions. So I think it would be generally a good idea to for students to push on which mechanisms are available in their department, and to strengthen those where possible through collective action. But short of systemic change, I would say that once you're in a PhD program and you are in a bad mentorship situation, the first thing to do would be to find a trusted PI other than your mentor, who you can confidentially talk to about your situation, and they can often point you to other resources.
Thanks, Wei Ji. And are there any other questions in the chat? We're actually doing good on time, so I think we can take a couple before the last slide.
Yeah, so one is maybe you wanted to say for last, is there anything you regret going into your PhD? I don't know when you want to handle that. There was
We're going to end on a positive note, so let's do regret
right.
first.
Let's do this one now then. Anything you regret going into your PhD?
Sorry, I'm always the first to talk, I guess. I don't think I regret anything, mostly because I kind of take the view that everything is like, it sounds really, really cheesy, but learning experience. You can't really like be the person you are without the good and bad stuff that you went through. So, you know, while I could have definitely imagined like a better way, like a better plan for my PhD, and if I redid it, you know, I could probably have done it better, but like, I don't think I really regret it because, you know, the bad experiences, for better or worse, kind of make you also like a sharper person, you know, more ready for some of the challenges that are still ahead of you after your PhD. So yeah, I guess that's kind of a cop-out answer, but it's true.
Emily?
I think I wish I had gotten a little bit more experience before going into it. Like I said, I went basically right from undergrad into my program. And I think it would have been, I think, a little bit better if I had done like a tech position or a lab manager. One, to build up some savings because, you know, don't get paid a ton being a PhD student. And two, to just really solidify some skills that I think I needed to really fine tune at the beginning of my PhD that I think I could have done previously.
Yeah, definitely. I think I went straight through and I give everybody the advice to take some time to figure things out. Anything else on this topic, Johnny and Melanie? All right. Well, in that case, our last topic is tips to succeed. So I know we are running out of time, so I just want to go around and have each of you give your sort of top tip if you were going back to talk to your future self, what you would have told yourself to do to best prepare for succeeding within the PhD. And then if we have time, we'll turn back to the Q&A again. So let's start with Johnny.
I think like maintaining the work-life balance throughout, which often I think required more organizational and like planning skills than I had when I started this whole thing out. And so that would be something I wish I could have, like, you know, there's always times before a deadline, before a thing where you feel like, okay, like I got to do this. So you sacrifice a little bit of that like life balance to do something like that. And I definitely know there's ways I could have avoided that. And so any kind of like organization planning, things that you can do to just maintain more of a balance throughout rather than like kind of binging it on like the work versus the life whenever you need to. I would say like balance would have been the thing that I needed to hear when I started.
All right, balance. Melanie, what's your top tip for success?
I guess I had been thinking along the same lines. I would say like maintain like something outside of graduate school, like be it a strong group of friends, be it a hobby, like religious practice, whatever it is that you feel engaged in and passionate about that's separate from your identity in academia, because like we've talked about, it's not always going to go well. And so having something outside that you can kind of have to broaden your perspective that this isn't all of life, I think is helpful for just having as good of mental health as you can. Yeah.
Definitely. What's your top tip, Julie?
I guess this is more something I've thought about a lot, which is like something I wanted to tell myself as like a first year PhD student, which is like, don't care so much about what other people say to you or, you know, their advice to you, really. I mean, you know, I think part of this was to like have different perspective, which I think is really important. So you don't want to take any one person's point of view too much, even if like, you know, if they're being nice about it. So I guess like my tip would just be to, you know, be true to yourself and, you know your own worth, and don't be so like yanked around by what other people tell you you should be doing, or like, you know, how much work you should be doing, or, you know, how much time you should be spending on hobbies, or, you know, in any direction really. So just yeah, don't take anyone's advice or comments too seriously.
All great tips. Emily, what's your top tip?
My top tip would be to definitely prioritize like mental and physical health earlier. If you're feeling overwhelmed and way too stressed out, like you can go to therapy specifically to get coping mechanisms for stress. And I think that that would have helped a lot more in the beginning, especially in the fluctuating beginning time where you're not sure about your thesis project, you're not sure what direction you want to take. You can really get some helpful tips about how to de-stress and different coping mechanisms that, you know, I wish I had had earlier.
All excellent tips. Weiji, do we have a minute to take another question from the Q&A, or should we wrap up?
I'm fine taking another question. And I've been sort of multitasking here, so maybe this already came up, but the currently top rated unanswered question is, what are the things you should look for in a mentor? Did anybody, did that already, was that discussed in detail? No, okay, so maybe something to ask the panel.
Go ahead, Emily.
I think the biggest tip is to find somebody that's supportive. That can be hard to tell at the beginning, but definitely talk to other students because there's rumors. Every school has rumors. But find somebody, especially because I've known PIs that like only want you to go in academia. If you don't do it, they won't support you in what you do. And that is not a good, you know, mindset to go into. So find somebody that is going to support you in your career decisions, support you in the lab, and support you like mentally as well. That was the biggest thing for me.
I want to completely agree with that. Like very often it's the focus is on research match, but as soon as you have a chance, get the rumors, get the gossip, get the inside information about how it actually is to work with somebody, because I've seen too often that somebody starts working with a very accomplished scientist, and when they're there, they're completely miserable because it turns out to be a toxic environment. So that's, I think, a generally overlooked aspect of the PhD.
Johnny, you had your hand up.
Yeah, a really useful tip I heard from my PIs whenever you're interviewing or looking into another lab is to go have some kind of a meet and greet with the students there without the PI, so that you have an opportunity to ask them questions in like a more kind of anonymous environment relative to that PI. And it's something that we do for any student interviewing into our lab. All the grad students will like take them out for lunch and they can ask questions, get to know their fit in the lab beyond science questions, and also ask science questions too. But it kind of helps give that more rounded info that you need.
Yeah, and also I would say just to keep it in mind when you're interviewing with the professor themselves. It can be like, obviously you have a lot of things in your mind at the moment, but also remember that this is somebody that you would work with, and is it somebody that you feel comfortable with and that you feel like you can communicate with, or are you put on edge for some reason? Even in brief interviews, you typically can get some sort of sense there.
Just emphasizing with like interview selection, it goes both ways. Like as a student, you want to find a PI that works for you. You're interviewing them as well, and you want to find compatibility. So like it's okay for you to have exclusion criteria in all sorts of different levels, like topics, like work environments, anything that like is important to you. Be sure to select for that in your interviews and when you're applying for things.
Yeah, I think that's a great point and probably a good place to wrap up. I have a couple more resources listed on this slide, and these slides will be made available on growingupinscience.com, and we'll also add the resource that Kate Messenbaum linked. Weiji, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I just want to thank everybody involved. So I want to thank our panelists who gave very, very insightful and thoughtful answers. Thanks so much, Ali, for being a moderator. Thanks for all the excellent questions that came in advance and during. I've been trying to type some answers, but sorry that I couldn't completely keep up. we might be able to just type some more answers in a document and post that on the Growing Up in Science website. And finally, everybody is invited to attend future Growing Up in Science meetings that will, the upcoming one is going to be a conversation with Daniel Colon Ramos, who's a professor at Yale, in part about his efforts to improve diversity and fight racism in science. That's going to be on August 21st. If you're on the mailing list, you will get announcements of that. And thanks everybody again.
Yeah, thank you. Round of applause to all of our amazing panelists, and thank you all for coming and joining us today.